Chapter 1. Roots in the Dark. The woods were old. That wasn't exactly news to anyone who lived in Podlaskie, where you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a pine older than your grandfather. But there was something about these particular woods. They weren't just old. They were the kind of old that sat heavy in your gut. The kind that made the hair rise on your arms even when the sun was shining and birds were chattering away like idiots. Maria Nowicka stood at the edge of them now, boots squelching in mud, rain still dripping from the brim of her hood. The forest stretched ahead of her like the open jaws of something that had been waiting a very long time to swallow. She told herself she wasn't scared, told herself she was a scientist, a dendrologist for Christ's sake. She studied trees for a living, a rational person, a data gatherer. Rational people didn't let themselves get spooked by shadows. But she was lying, and she knew it. The smell of wet rot drifted out at her, sour and earthy. The trunks rose like black columns in the fog. So close together they looked like prison bars. And somewhere in there, beyond the damp needles, the tangled roots, the dripping branches, was the spot where they'd found Camel. Her cousin. Her mother's sister's only boy, 27 years old, liked to play guitar on Sundays, never remembered to pay back borrowed money, but always picked up the tab when he had it. A human being, reduced to a forensics report that used words like lacerations and wooden fragments embedded beneath dermal tissue. Wooden fragments, like the trees themselves had gotten into him. The official story was wolves, or maybe a bear. Maria had read the police report and wanted to laugh or scream at how fast they'd slammed that door shut. For bodies in less than a year, all found with bark in their wounds, and the best they could come up with was, yeah, must have been an animal. Case closed. Sure. And she was the Queen of England. Maria tightened the strap on her backpack and made herself step forward. One step, then another. The mud sucked at her boots with little obscene sounds, like the forest didn't really want to let her go. Just trees, she said aloud, her breath making white fog in the chilly air. Just trees. She didn't believe it, not for a second. The first sight was marked with faded yellow tape. It fluttered limply around the trunk of a beech, the words Politia already half washed away by rain. The ground still bore the scar of whatever had happened there, a patch of earth darker than the rest, like a shadow that wouldn't fade. Maria crouched down, brushing aside slick leaves with her gloved hand. Camel, she whispered before she could stop herself. The sound of his name out here felt like dropping a stone down a well. Something about it went too deep, echoed in a way that made her throat tighten. The wind rose suddenly, pushing through the trees with a dry clatter. Branches knocked together in a sound like teeth. She straightened fast, hugging her notebook to her chest. Jesus Christ, she muttered. Her father had begged her not to come. Her aunt had flat out refused to say Camel's name, convinced that remembering him would only invite more death. But Maria, stubborn Maria, couldn't leave it alone. Couldn't stand by while everyone else shrugged and said that's just the way it is out here. She pulled herself together, jotting a few notes to give her hand something to do. Soil condition, tree density, moss growth, normal things, safe things. The feeling of eyes on her didn't go away. It was maybe 30 minutes later, deeper in, that she saw the tree. At first glance, it was just another pine, thick trunk rising high into the gloom. But the bark was marked, scarred, carved, symbols. Long spirals and jagged slashes cut deep into the wood, resin bleeding down like the tree was crying sap. Some of the marks were so fresh they gleamed wet. Maria felt her stomach lurch. She reached out, then snatched her hand back like a kid daring herself to touch a hot stove. Not normal, she whispered. Her voice sounded small. She fished out her phone, snapped a picture. The shutter click was far too loud, a gunshot in the silence. A crow exploded out of the branches above, wings beating like a flurry of cards. Maria stumbled backward, nearly dropping her phone. Her heart banged in her throat. "Goddamn birds," she hissed, but she didn't believe her own irritation. Because there was a smell now. Not just rot, not just the honest stink of wet leaves. This was sharper, resin mixed with something coppery, sawdust and iron, like blood drying in a carpentry shop. Her skin prickled. She shoved the phone back in her pocket and kept moving, her pace faster now, like she could outwalk whatever was crawling up her spine. The second sight was worse. A hollow in the earth, rimmed with birches so pale they looked like skeletons. Tape sagged between two trunks, and beyond it lay the mess the police had left behind. Scraps of clothing tangled in brambles, patches of soil churned up in chaotic gouges. Maria ducked under the tape and went down. Her boots sank in the mud. She crouched, pulling tweezers from her kit, and picked up a shred of fabric. Denim, torn, dark with old stains. She closed her eyes and saw her aunt again, shoulders shaking as she clutched the bag of personal effects the police had handed her. Maria forced the image away and kept working. She examined the gouges in the ground, deep scratches too wide and erratic to be human. Then she saw it. Splinters. Several long shards of wood driven deep into the mud. She pulled one free, careful like it might bite her. It wasn't just a branch. It was a weapon. Jagged. Tapered to a point sharp enough to punch right through flesh. Her hands trembled. This was it. This was what they'd found in Camel's body. Wood shoved into him like he was soil and the forest had decided to plant something. Maria slid the shard into a sample bag, her breath shallow. She had this sudden mad thought that it was moving, writhing just slightly in her grip like a root still searching for earth. She froze. Footsteps, not hers. Something shifted at the edge of the hollow. Maria turned slowly, her throat dry. "Hello." Her voice cracked. The birches stood motionless, but in the corner of her vision, there, a shape, too tall, too broad, lurking between trunks. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The shape didn't move, didn't blink, and then gone. Maria's body decided for her. She scrambled up the slope, slipping in mud, hard in her ears. Branches clawed at her jacket as she stumbled toward the track. When she finally broke through the tree-line and saw her little silver hatchback waiting on the gravel, it felt like salvation. She slammed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat there gasping like a fish. What the hell was that? Her eyes flicked to the mirror. For one terrible second, she thought she saw something at the tree line, watching her, a figure crowned with antlers, its outline more shadow than flesh. Then the road curved, and it was gone. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her aunt's guest bed, staring at the ceiling while rain whispered against the window. Her samples sat across the room in sealed bags, but she could almost hear them, like they carried a little piece of the forest inside. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw spirals carved into bark. She smelled resin and blood. She heard branches knocking together like bones. Finally, she snapped the lamp on, unable to stand the dark. Somewhere outside, a crow screamed once, then fell silent. Maria pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, shivering. Whatever was in those woods had noticed her, and it wasn't going to be forgotten. Chapter 2, The Hollow-Eyed Ones. Maria dreamed of trees. Not the harmless kind she'd spent years cataloging in her notebooks. Not the tidy diagrams she'd drawn in University of Root Systems and Vascular Cambium. No, these were warped things. She walked between them barefoot in the dream, the forest floor soft and sucking under her feet, like the earth itself wanted her soles for keeps. The trees bent overhead, their branches knitting into grotesque shapes, antlers, claws, cages. She thought she saw her cousin Camel among them, skin gray, his mouth crammed full of roots that wriggled when he tried to scream. She woke with her own scream muffled in the pillow. The lamp was still on. Her aunt's house was silent except for the rain. Maria sat up, heart hammering, and swore she could smell resin again, sharp and sweet in the back of her throat. She stayed awake until dawn. Her aunt, Irina, said nothing over breakfast. The woman had aged 20 years since Camel's death. She moved slow, her eyes sunk deep into their sockets. Maria remembered her as loud, stubborn, given to gossip over coffee at the kitchen table. Now she shuffled about like a ghost, hair uncombed, her robe hanging loose. Maria tried. I went out there yesterday, to the forest. Irina froze with her teacup halfway to her lips. You shouldn't. It's for my research. I'm documenting. Maria. Irina's voice cracked. Leave it alone. Don't go back. Maria swallowed her protest. The words on her tongue, Camel deserves the truth, died when she saw the lines on her aunt's face. Instead, she said, I'll be careful. Irina set her cup down hard enough to slosh tea. Careful won't help. It sees who goes in. Maria blinked. What? But her aunt only shook her head and began clearing the dishes with trembling hands. Later, Maria drove into town. A grim little cluster of buildings straddling the main road. A grocery store, a post office, a bar with an awning that had seen better decades. The kind of place where strangers stood out like sore thumbs, even if you'd been born 2 kilometers down the road. She parked near the police station, a squat building that looked more like a shipping container with windows. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed. A man behind the desk glanced up from his paperwork. Morning, Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm here about my cousin, Camel Nowicki. The man's face didn't change. He gestured at a chair. 10 minutes later, the local police chief emerged from the back. A thick-set man with a belly that pushed against his belt, his hair clipped short. His badge read, Commissars will check. Miss Nowicka, yes? His tone was polite, but the kind of polite that says, I'd rather be anywhere else. That's right. I'm sorry for your loss. Maria clenched her hands in her lap. I just want to know what's being done. For people have died out there. My cousin, Miss Nowicka, will check held up a hand. I understand, but we've investigated thoroughly. Our conclusion is clear. Wild animals. This forest is their home. Her laugh came out harsh. Do wild animals shove bark under people's skin? His expression tightened. There was trauma that can create strange injuries. Splinters in his lungs, in his stomach. Enough. The word dropped like a hammer. Other officers at their desks looked up, then quickly backed down again. Wolchek leaned forward, lowering his voice. Miss Nowicka, I don't know what you think you'll find poking around in that forest, but nothing good will come of it. Do you understand me? She stared at him. His eyes were bloodshot, but beneath the tiredness was something else. Fear. Yes, she said finally. But she didn't mean it. She stopped at the bar on her way back. Inside, the air smelled of cigarettes and fried onions. A handful of men sat hunched over beers, though it was barely noon. Conversation died as soon as she entered. The bartender, a heavy-set woman with dyed red hair, raised an eyebrow. You're Nowicka, aren't you? Maria nodded. Camel was my cousin. Murmurs stirred in the corner. One of the men spat on the floor. The bartender set down her rag. You shouldn't be here. I just want to know what people are saying. About the forest. That got a laugh. Not a kind one. One of the men, thin, with a nose crooked from old breaks, called out. What they say it's cursed. Always has been. People used to stay the hell out of there after dark. Now the city folk come with their cameras, their flashlights. For dead. Maybe that'll teach them. Maria bristled. My cousin wasn't a tourist. He grew up here. The man shrugged. It didn't matter, did it? The bartender shot him a look, then leaned closer to Maria. My advice, you get back to Warsaw. Nothing for you here but grief. Maria thanked her and left, the weight of their eyes heavy on her back. That evening she sat in her aunt's kitchen, sorting through her notes. Photos of the carved tree stared up from her phone screen. The spirals twisted until she felt dizzy looking at them. She almost didn't hear the knock at the door. It came again, 3 short raps. Her aunt was asleep upstairs. Maria set her pen down, nerves buzzing. She opened the door. A boy stood there, 16, maybe 17, skinny, with a mop of black hair half covering his eyes. He wore a jacket too big for him, sleeves hanging past his hands. Your camel's cousin, he said. Maria nodded slowly. Yes. Who are you? Mateusz. He glanced over his shoulder, then back. Can I come in? Something about his voice made her hesitate, but she stepped aside. He entered quickly, like he didn't want to be seen. You've been out there, he said. Not a question. Maria folded her arms. I have. What? I've seen it too. His voice dropped. The thing in the woods. Her stomach lurched. What thing? He looked at her like she was stupid. The one that killed them. She swallowed hard. Describe it. Mateusz shivered. Tall. Too tall. With horns or branches. I don't know. I only saw it once last winter, though I dreamed it, until the first body showed up. Maria's pulse hammered. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not going to stop. His eyes glittered in the dim light. And you need to know, if you keep going back, it'll notice you. It already has. The words landed like a stone in her chest. Mateusz backed toward the door. Don't go alone. Not at night. And if you hear the crows, run. Then he was gone, slipping into the rain. Maria shut the door with shaking hands. Upstairs, her aunt shifted in her sleep, muttering something too soft to catch. Maria pressed her forehead to the wood of the door. She wanted to tell herself the boy was making it up. Small towns bred stories like mold on bread. But deep down she knew. She'd seen something at the tree line. She'd felt it. And if what Mateusz said was true, if it had already noticed her, then the game had changed. The forest wasn't just a place to investigate anymore. It was a hunting ground. That night the dream came again, thicker, heavier. She stood in the forest, the trees pressing in close. The ground pulsed beneath her feet, roots writhing like veins. And from the shadows came a sound like wood splitting under an axe, but it was breathing. Between the trunks, something shifted, towering, antlered, faceless. And behind it, dozens of figures hung from the branches, limp as broken dolls. She woke with blood in her mouth, where she'd bitten her tongue in her sleep. The lamp flickered once, then died, plunging the room into darkness. And from outside, faint but undeniable, came the harsh, grating chorus of crows. Chapter 3, Old Bones Under Moss. Maria spent the next morning in a little library that sat at the edge of town, across from a bakery. The library was hardly bigger than a 2-bedroom flat, with linoleum floors that curled at the edges and the faint mildew smell of old paper left too close to damp. The librarian was a woman in her 60s with hair dyed an impossible shade of orange, the kind of color you bought in a box at the grocery store. Her name tag read Helena. I'm looking for folklore, Maria said, sliding her ID across the desk like it was a hall pass. Legends about the forest. My cousin died out there. Helena's bright hair didn't hide the tired set of her mouth. She nodded slowly. A no-wicca, yes? Terrible thing. They say wolves, but I don't believe it. Maria leaned forward. What do you believe? Helena's lips pressed together. That there are things older than wolves. She led Maria to a dusty shelf in the back. where slim volumes sat like half-forgotten children. Most were pamphlets bound in cracked covers, titles stamped in fading ink, legends of Podlaskie, the dark roots, folk tales of the eastern border, forest warnings. Maria carried a stack to the nearest table. The pages smelled of mildew and dry leaves. She flipped through story after story, wolves that turned into men, fires that danced without flame, women who became owls at dusk. But one story kept surfacing, retold in different words, different decades. The story of the Lesnie Pan, the forest lord. In one version, he was a man who killed a stag on holy ground and was cursed to wear its antlers forever, banished to the woods until time ended. In another, he was never human at all, but a spirit born from roots and shadow, the guardian of old forests. Sometimes he was a protector, more often, punisher. Maria read one passage twice, then a third time. Those who harm the forest draw the Lord's eye. He marks them with splinters, filling their blood with wood. They do not die quickly. They are planted. They are made into soil. Her stomach turned. Splinters in the flesh. Wood in the blood. Camel. Maria closed the book, hands trembling. That evening she returned to the bar. The same men were there, nursing their beers like it was a full-time job. The bartender gave her a look halfway between pity and warning. She ordered a coffee just to have something in front of her, then turned to the crooked-nosed man she remembered from before. "What do you know about the forest lord?" she asked. The room went quiet. The man's lips twisted in something like a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been reading the old books. Answer me." He shrugged, taking a slow pull from his glass. "My grandfather used to tell me stories. Said Lesnie Pan walked between the trees at night. Said if you heard branches knocking together with no wind, you'd better run. That's just a story. Sure." He leaned closer, his breath sour with beer. "And 4 people tore themselves apart with tree bark, right? Just a story." Maria's throat tightened. Another man, older, gray stubble bristling his chin, muttered, "Used to be you left offerings. Bread, milk, the first catch of the hunt. Keep him fed, and he'd leave you alone. But no one believes anymore. And when people stop believing..." The crooked-nosed man cut him off with a sharp look. Maria filed the words away. "Offerings, milk, bread, a kind of bargain." The bartender set down her rag with a thump. "You should leave this alone, girl. Curiosity doesn't end well here." Maria didn't reply. She drank her bitter coffee, left some bills on the counter, and walked out into the drizzle. Behind her, the men's voices rose again in low, uneasy murmurs. She dreamed of crows that night. Hundreds of them, black feathers filling the sky, blotting out the moon. They landed on rooftops, on fences, on her cousin's guitar left out in the yard. Their eyes gleamed like beads. When she woke, one was sitting on the sill outside her window, staring in. Its beak tapped once, twice, like a warning. Then it took off into the gray morning. On the third day, Maria drove out to the parish office. Old churches were like treasure chests of memory. If anyone had written records, it would be there. The priest was a thin man named Father Jan, hair silvering at the temples, his collar slightly askew. He welcomed her politely.